Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters on France 24. Coming up on this week's edition. The UN calls for the deaths of all journalists killed in Gaza to be independently investigated after another 2 reporters were killed in the territory. They'd been on assignment with Al Jazeera. Its rulings are final and without appeal, but the court has no way of enforcing them as South Africa brings a case against Israel to the ICJ, accusing it of genocide. We'll be discussing the Israeli response and what's likely to happen at this week's hearings. And amid sharp criticism of his handling of the hostage crisis and under pressure from within his own hard-right government, Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister faces mounting calls for him to resign once the war is over. Well, the UN has voiced alarm at the high number of journalists killed in Gaza since the start of the war. On Sunday, 2 reporters lost their lives after their car was hit in an Israeli strike near Rafah. One of them, the son of the Al Jazeera Gaza bureau chief. The channel is accusing Israel of carrying out a targeted killing. Jenny Shin has more.
Gathered to pay their respects to the slain Al Jazeera journalists. According to the Qatari channel and the Hamas-affiliated Ministry of Health, they were killed in the early hours of Sunday in an Israeli airstrike in the southern Gaza Strip. The bereaved father of one of the victims heads Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau. He wants the world to be aware of the tragedy, which claimed the life of not only his son, but also dozens of other dedicated journalists before him.
What did Hamza do to the Israelis? What did my family do to them? What did the civilians do to them? They did nothing. Yet the world turns a blind eye to what's happening in the Gaza Strip.
It's difficult to establish the exact number of journalists killed in the besieged enclave, where it's impossible for foreign observers to enter or leave. But according to the International Federation of Journalists, at least 79 are believed to have been killed in Gaza in the 3 months of war.
Gaza's journalist corps starts out at the beginning of this conflict about 1,000 strong, and between sort of 8 and 10% of their number are now dead. Quite a large number are also injured. And they are continuing to work in really circumstances that it's quite hard, I think, to imagine. They are at the edges of physical collapse, starvation, and dehydration. And yet, astonishingly, they continue to work.
The Qatari channel, which has lost 3 of their own since the start of the war, has accused Israel of targeting journalists in Gaza.
Desperate to escape the violence, nearly 85% of the population of Gaza have been displaced by the fighting. Almost 1.3 million people are living in UN shelters. With cold nights and heavy rains drenching clothes and mattresses, hypothermia is becoming another deadly threat for the youngest and most vulnerable. Our colleagues at France 2 television are in Rafah. They sent us this report.
Winter is settling in over Rafah and the immense camp which now exists right next to it. These internally displaced people, Gazan families from across the enclave, face cold temperatures, rain and mud.
It rained all night. I found this bit of plastic, but it has holes and we got all wet.
In their makeshift tents, they're barely protected, with no carpet or anything to isolate themselves from the cold ground. Repairing these tents is now a major concern, and under the dripping shelter, they don't even have enough clothes or cloth to keep warm.
We share things. 1 blanket for 2 of us.
This father is out of solutions. Every night, his 3 boys and 2 girls say they're freezing.
This situation is killing me. They tell me they're cold and I can do nothing.
In this other tent, a baby boy is tired and sick. His mother doesn't know who to turn to.
These Hamas people hide in their houses and their tunnels while we have nothing to eat or drink and we're freezing to death.
When the rain stops, people go searching for wood, which is scarce and expensive. This family has 1 log to cook. It adds anything it can find to keep the flames going.
We throw in cardboard, plastic, anything we can find.
Somewhere in the middle of the camp, the air is a bit warmer, around an oven for bread. This couple never thought they would become bakers.
I only found leaves today for the fire. It takes time and it's difficult.
The rain is back, and helpless children just let it drip over them or reach out for anything to cover themselves.
The International Court of Justice is to hold hearings this week on a case brought by South Africa accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza and seeking an emergency suspension of its military campaign. Israel has described the allegations against it as baseless, claiming that they're intended to stir up lethal hatred against Jews. Well, for more, we're joined in studio now by France 24 journalist Shirli Sitbon. Shirli, good to have you with us this week. Firstly, why exactly is South Africa taking this case, and why at the ICJ?
Well, because they say that other UN bodies have failed. We can see the General Assembly, for example, well, its resolutions are not binding. The Security Council, its resolutions are binding, but the U.S. has vetoed resolutions calling for a ceasefire right away. So South Africa thought that it would be the right idea to go to international justice, to this court. Why? Well, because Israel and South Africa's are both part of it, because this International Court of Justice is part of the UN. It's called the World Court. And Israel and South Africa are both signatories of the UN Genocide Treaty. And so South Africa can do this, and it believes it has to do this so it can stop the violence in the Middle East. So what South Africa is saying, it's saying that Israel is committing genocide right now in Gaza, because it says genocide is defined as acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, an ethnical, a racial, or a religious group. And it says that so many people have died, have been killed in the Israeli bombings in the Gaza Strip, that this amounts to genocide. And it says plus, schools, hospitals, mosques, churches have been hit, people have been displaced. And also, it notes that some Israeli officials have used language that is very extreme, even one minister calling to use the nuclear weapon in the Gaza Strip. So for South Africa, this makes the case for genocide.
How then is Israel likely to respond to those allegations?
It says it's the complete opposite, that it's defending itself from Hamas, which wants to annihilate Israel. It says that, yes, it has displaced people in Gaza, but that's because it doesn't want to kill many civilians in Gaza, and that it's targeting Hamas. It says that if it hit hospitals, schools, and some mosques and churches, it's because Hamas is using them for weapons and with its tunnels. And the Israelis say that South Africa has a hypocritical attitude. They say that from the October 8th, the day after the massacre, South Africa sided with Hamas, and that in the past, when the International Criminal Court asked South Africa to arrest Omar al-Bashir, which was suspected and declared guilty of committing genocide, among other things, well, South Africa refused to arrest him. So the Israelis say South Africa is a hypocrite. And meanwhile, it chose the former president of its Supreme Court, Ron Barak, to represent it in the court as one of the judges, because in the International Court of Justice, each state can choose one judge, which will be added to the group of judges.
Now, Shirley, cases at the ICJ, they can drag on for years. South Africa is hoping this case will help bring the war to an end. How can that happen?
Yes, because it's the base of the case, the actual arguments about genocide that take many years to get a ruling. But South Africa is not seeking just that. It wants immediate measures, which can be taken in a number of days or in a number of weeks, because South Africa has asked the court to take measures, for example, to call on Israel to stop right now the operations in Gaza. That's something it can do. The court can do that. It has asked the court also to tell the Israelis to stop displacing the Gazans and to help bring in right away humanitarian aid, and that is binding. But the court does not have a way of enforcing this, so it could do other things. It can also decide to take sanctions against Israel. And, well, this is also symbolic, because this is a decision against Israel, and it would weaken Israel, and that's also something that could, make the situation more fragile, and maybe later on help end the situation. South Africa believes that the whole situation is due to the Israeli policy, not just what's happening now, but a long-term policy, and so it would like Israel's position to be weakened.
Shirley, thank you so much for that analysis. France 24 journalist Shirli Sitbon. Well, support for Benjamin Netanyahu has fallen sharply despite public opinion remaining firmly behind Israel's military offensive in Gaza. Both the Prime Minister's opponents and traditional allies are calling for him to resign once the war is over. Concerns are also mounting about the financial toll of the conflict, which is costing the Israeli economy hundreds of millions of dollars each day.
Shame on our leaders, they chant. Thousands of Israelis gather in Habima Square in Tel Aviv. They want the Prime Minister and his right-wing coalition to resign.
We had enough. We had enough. The government are a bunch of idiots. They are leading us to a horrible place. Bibi Netanyahu and all the rest of his idiots are ruining Israel, and they are destroying everything we hope and dreamed of.
Many of these protesters were evacuated from neighborhoods close to the Gaza Strip, where the war still rages on. When Hamas attacked Israel on the 7th of October, many lost a friend or a relative. They accuse the Israeli army of failing to protect them and blame Prime Minister Netanyahu for the chaos.
Our government are not working for the people. And they're working against our interests and working only for their personal interests. And now, with the war going on, it's getting even worse.
The conflict is entering its 4th month, costing nearly $60 billion, according to the Yediot Aharonot newspaper.
This includes the cost of the war budget as well as financial support from civilians whose income has decreased due to the conflict.
Not to mention the costs of evacuating residents from the north and the south. According to the newspaper, the war in Gaza costs Israelis nearly $272 million every day. And it seems far from over. Despite growing international calls for a ceasefire, Prime Minister Netanyahu has warned that the war would, quote, continue for many more months.
Well, that's it for this week's edition of Middle East Matters. Stay with us for more world news here on France 24.